Good afternoon, everyone. Digital clock says 2 o'clock, so we'll have to deal with the analog one. But welcome, everyone, to District of Sechelt Planning and Community Development Committee meeting for April 25th, 2018. Before we get moving today on today's agenda, we'll begin with a call to order and a declaration of conflict for any councillors who feel they need to have an item to declare. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 2, which is the adoption of the agenda. If I have a mover and a seconder. Were there any additions from staff or any changes? Nope, seeing none. All those in favor? And that's carried. There are no appointments and delegations. And moving on to committee minutes and reports. Item 4.1, minutes of planning and community development of March 28th for receipt. Do I have a mover? And a seconder. Any items to discuss on there? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Item 4.2, minutes of advisory planning commission meeting, February 15th, 2018. Moved and seconded. Any items to discuss there? I actually had one from there. So these are the February 15th minutes, is that correct? We didn't get them in time for some of the items to already have been dealt with, actually. And so I'm curious if staff can comment on page 12, there's a number of items that were dealt with by the Advisory Planning Commission with relation to the Resland application. Were those then incorporated into what we saw here? They were, okay. 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 In terms of a process thing, is there anything we can do to try to get these so that we can see the flow through in the minutes and this committee can be in benefit of that advice? Maybe something to think about in future, but this was a little bit stale dated, so we just didn't get it in time.
Just to clarify, so if in case where an APC has made a recommendation, usually where we flow it through is into the following staff report as part of the referrals of what was done, what did they suggest, and then what was changed in the application. Is that sufficient, or are there cases where you're just not seeing that information come through as to how it was actually responded to?
Well, in this case, it was a little bit more, I guess you would say, detailed than what was discussed in the staff report, and that's fine. I think our APC does some fantastic work, so we want to find a way to kind of strengthen the communication between the two. And since nobody from this committee sits on that committee, we have the minutes and we have the staff reports are our two options. But if there are other ideas, then we'd definitely like to hear them. Anything from committee on that? All right, all those in favor? And that's carried. Item 4.3, minutes of the Advisory Planning Commission meeting, April 12th for receipt. Moved and seconded. Any discussion of those? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Item 4.4, minutes of Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting, April 12th, 2018 for receipt. Moved and seconded. Any discussion of those? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. This is through you to staff. There are a couple of things in here. So the last recommendation, disability parking spot on Cowrie Street, that it be repainted. So given it's coming to this meeting, how is that actually dealt with? Where does it go?
Director Corbett.
Through the chair, we had a number of discussions on that because there were a number of things that were coming out of advisory committee that had a lot more to do with public works and to make sure it's flowing through. So we're having some internal discussion, making sure that gets passed on, because it wouldn't be at that point, it's not really a planning matter in terms of our ability to implement. So we've been flowing through some of that information to public works and to engineering.
Right, and if I could just add to that, some of it also has to do with parks. So I think what we need to do is flag some of these operational issues and just make sure they get either to the chair of that committee or to the staff person involved, because that one in particular keeps getting raised. How do we get these things painted? And of course, there's going to be once a year that we do some painting, and we could pay attention to it then, as long as we know. Thanks. All those in favor? That's carried. Okay, seeing no items of new business arising from those minutes, we'll move on to the business items. Item 6.1, Mobius Architecture, BC zoning, official community plan amendment for the new supportive housing facility. A report from the municipal planner. If I can have someone move receipt. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Ms. Lutman, your report.
Okay, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm just going to give a short PowerPoint here, try to summarize the application. You have a detailed report in front of you, and in terms of background, it's at the top, Megan. It says full slideshow or slideshow. You can go slideshow full image. Yeah. From the beginning, you could say. Okay. So in terms of background, the property is located at the corner of High Tide Avenue and the continuation of High Tide through an undeveloped portion that's located here and Lamprey Lane. In terms of the context within the neighborhood, there is a 21-unit apartment building here, rental apartment building, Wharf Avenue. All of these homes here, and this is a small multifamily development that's quite old. These are all rental accommodations in the homes, and we have the shelter located with a number of businesses, the Community Services Food Bank, a storage facility, Ebtide Street, a number of multifamily townhome developments in here, and the Municipal Water Resource Center. I did want to highlight that the legal plan of the property indicates that the size of the property is 0.1820 hectares. But in actual fact, when the surveyor measured it, it is 1,817 square meters. And so when they did the legal plan, they rounded up. And that makes a bit of a difference between the 220 units of density that we're looking at. And when it's 1,817, it's 221 units of density per hectare. This is an aerial shot of the property. I'd like to highlight that there are some unofficial community paths running along here. This is the food bank, and you have another one running through here. So it's important to think about the neighborhood context and continuing a sort of pathway system through the neighborhood. It's basically a flat property. You can see the old terminus of High Tide Avenue. Originally, the lots were two lots with a bubble road end, and that was taken away a few years ago in terms of a road closure, which also created the extra wide road right-of-way. Instead of 20 meters at this location, we have 24 meters. These are a couple of shots from Google looking down High Tide Avenue and across the property from Lamprey Lane and High Tide Avenue looking back. This I'd like to point out is the group of trees that members of the neighborhood, some public people have identified that they would like to keep these trees as much as possible. And what staff have done have gone out and we surveyed the trees and the type and the location. We have here the property line. You can just see a faint line here is the actual property line. And this tree is close to the corner pin. It's a good defined fir tree. So there is potential to have a continuation of High Tide come down in this area that does not have any trees. We might lose a few within this area here. The exact design we'll be looking at that when we do the development permit, if it does come forward in that sense. Detailed design. Official community plan designation is multifamily. The zoning is R4, multifamily, that allows apartments and townhomes. So the proposal, this is a concept of the site development that indicates setbacks proposed of 3 meters here and 3 meters here, 7.5 in the rear and 7.5. You can see there's quite a lot of setback here on the side. This is a drawing that shows the potential for an additional 5 meters of road dedication going to the project. Even if the council wished to consider 2 meters, that would allow an additional offset from here of 3 meters. The whole building could move this direction and allow a 5-meter setback on that side closest to the apartments. These are conceptual massing studies. If the project proceeds through first reading and public hearing, there will be coming forward a development permit proposal for the building with more detailed design. In comparison to the existing R4 zoning, this is the proposed massing. The red indicates what the R4 zoning permits. So in the sense that you need a required 6 meters here. This is like 3 meters out. So but you can see the height is exactly the same. So they're similar in size. How this arrived is that you were getting a much smaller studio apartments are being proposed, and then that's the reason and the rationale behind the 40 units request. In the zoning that's permitted under R4, in comparison, the maximum density allowed under the R4 zone is 15 units. The proposal is 40 units. In terms of the height, it's unchanged. In terms of the lot coverage, the request is unchanged. Front setbacks, rear, and one of the side yards are all unchanged. The requirement, the one request change is for one side yard from 6 staying at 3, unless there is that road closure and the building could shift over. In terms of minimum parking, the proposal is for 5 parking spaces. And that would be, if there was some, staff are proposing that we work with that under the bylaw system and make it that it's 5 when under certain conditions. So you would be seeing that possibly coming forward in the next week as a proposed bylaw. The difference being that 1.5 spaces for apartments, including 1 accessible, is the R4 zoning. And under the CD proposed, it's 0.125 spaces for apartments, including 1 accessible. So the difference is being 1.375 spaces. It's a considerable difference, but the application is for a supportive housing development that's affordable housing with rental units for people of the lowest income bracket. And when staff have looked at the cost of operating a car, it's not feasible for people at this income bracket to own a vehicle. The proposed road closure we spoke about. This drawing indicates it would give at 5 meters width here, it would give an additional 209 square meters to the property. And that's just showing the indication again of the same. In terms of the off-site walkway improvements that engineering staff and planning staff are recommending, we have a sidewalk currently that terminates here in front of the Ebbtide Village townhouses. We would like to see this continued, and then instead of a sidewalk being on the frontage, that it continue down High Tide Avenue and come around to Lamprey. And then this portion would be extended, like on the road pavement. The pavement is fairly narrow there. We'd like to see a 1 meter or 1.5 meter indicated with cross hatching and line painting and a dedicated area for sidewalks. And then that would continue and come and meet into the wider part of Lamprey. You can see the dedication width here of Lamprey is very narrow, and then it widens out at this location here. So in terms of conditions of adoption, staff are recommending that the conditions be a development permit for multifamily housing, a housing agreement to be entered into that provides for 100% affordable rental housing units, a covenant to secure 4 accessible and 4 adaptable apartments. Currently 4 accessible apartments were proposed. Staff are recommending that the remaining 4 units on the ground floor be adaptable so that grab bars could be installed easily. Anyone with a walker might have that ability then to move into that unit. That an archaeological preliminary field reconnaissance study be completed. That came through as one of the requests from the Seychelles Nation. and securement of the off-site walkway improvements for portions of High Tide Avenue and Lamprey Lane. The options, I'd like to review those. You have your recommendations in front of you. They're quite detailed. But in terms of options, we have that in lieu of a partial road closure, that the southern lot line building side yard setback could be revised from 3 meters to 1 meter, and in effect have the same amount of setback from the other building. And that this would allow a greater setback to that apartment building. That the application for the proposed affordable would be altered or brought back. Or number 4 is that it be denied. And that's it. If there are any questions, the architect is here in the gallery today to answer any questions I cannot. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So I'll turn this over to committee for questions regarding the report. Councillor Leeds.
Thank you. When you talk about parking and limiting or reducing, are you taking into consideration some storage for bicycles, scooters, mopeds, those sorts of transportation? And also, where will there be a bicycle lane on the roadways?
I'll answer the first question if I may. One of the conditions of the reduced, that you'll be seeing coming forward in the bylaw for the amendment is going to be looking at a covered parking area for bicycles for 15 bicycles. So I think that can be accommodated in this area here on the site. So there is some ability for us to look at that, and if that's provided, then that's what the staff recommendation will be coming forward through the bylaw. In terms of the bicycle lanes, the width of High Tide I don't think permits having a bicycle lane per se, and certainly on Lamprey we are very limited width. The width between the telephone pole and the property line I think is approximately 4.5 meters. So if we can at least get a pedestrian way, then cyclists can have an ability to pull over on that area. Okay.
Thank you. Any follow-up? Nope. Seeing none. Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Could you go into more detail around the 2 options we have? One with regards to the road closure for the portion of the undeveloped southern end, and the other, the side yard setback, and just explain to us what the difference is. I understand there's a different process we'd have to follow, but what would the difference be on the lot?
So on the lot, if we closed a portion of this land here and then in effect sold it to the development for $1, it would move this property line over into the middle and would make the property in essence larger. And then this whole development here could shift. You can see at this point here, they've got 3 meters right here, and this is a 3 meter setback. If this moved over, they could get easily a 5 meter setback. It would be more in keeping with the R4 zoning. The other option is to decrease the setback here, keeping in mind that you're going to have a buffer of trees in this area. Decrease the setback here from 3 meters to 1 meter and slide the buildings closer to that property line. So in essence, the building would be shifted in both conditions to the same location, but one you're taking away a setback, so you're reducing a setback from 3 meters to 1 meter. In the other case, you're dedicating land and giving them the land that would be in that 3 meter setback. Is that clear?
Director Corbett for a comment.
Just wanted to clarify
Oh, sorry.
actual planning intent behind that was to be able to shift the building to provide more of a setback with the existing building. So it was really around kind of applying a little more privacy in there. So it's not it's one of those, it's not a deal killer on this development. It just would make it sit as a better neighbor. That was the planning rationale.
So follow up. So if we were to pursue the road closure, which looks like it's your preferred recommendation, that would require a separate process to go through, whereas the revision of the lot line would not. It could go along in conjunction. Is that correct?
That's correct. A road closure requires a bylaw and requires a process separate and advertisement to the public so that the public have an ability to comment on it.
And the impact on the trees in either case, same?
I'll just head back here to the overall aerial photograph, to that survey, if we can get there. Yeah. So you can see the property line here in purple right now. If it shifts 2 meters here, there's no impact really on the trees. The trees would still remain on public property. And the building would be coming in roughly in this area here, so when it shifts over. So currently the building is located at 3 meters back. If it shifts another 2 meters, it will be 1 meter back at this location here. This tree, I believe, could still be protected, the one that's in the corner of the property.
Okay, then I just want to make a comment on the parking. I know one of the residents behind and that the owners of that building there, the apartment building, had a concern about the parking stalls on the site. That they indicated that residents would have parking. I did talk to the Lions because they were there at the event, at the meeting, and they indicated that those residents that they have that would be similar to residents living in this facility with that level of income do not have vehicles at their sites right now. So I still had a bit of a concern about sufficient parking for staff. And I think they were going to look at that.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, if I could respond. This is the existing property to the north. There are, the pavement is extended into the property line and cars are allowed to park perpendicular to the road. We could continue something similar along this part of high tide to a certain point, and that would accommodate more on-street parking. It's something that if it's interests council, then we can look at that and bring it through the development permit process. And we review it, yeah.
Yeah. Director Corbett.
Just add, we both shared that concern when we first looked at this, that 5 seemed low for what this was. So we actually asked BC Housing to provide us with a little bit more information, particularly around they had experience with a number of similar properties throughout the province, and in providing that information determined that yes, that was sufficient. None of the residents will have vehicles, and that the 5 was sufficient for what their staffing was proposed, and they showed us a number of similar examples. So we took some comfort in that and did some additional analysis and felt that, you know, on first blush, yes, that seemed quite low, and we were concerned about what the impact would be on the adjacent development, but they gave us assurance that that was in fact sufficient for what was being proposed here.
So just to follow up on that point, if I could, would that, if we did entertain that concept, would that allow access for emergency vehicles on high tide?
Yes, I believe it would allow, you would still have in the proposal, because the entrance is off, there's one entrance to the building off this corner, and there's another exit here. We could ensure that there's an opening there on that side as well as on the corner side, and then we would obviously not have anything close to this corner anyway, so.
Thank you. Councillor Shanks, did I miss you in the queue there?
No, we're good. Yeah, I would suggest that the parking issue may not be a huge issue, but it is staff. It's different from the Lions. There's no staff in for their particular 4-story building. Staff? What staff? It's the other building that has people on staff. Anyway, that's another argument. Anyway, I've been in favor of moving it back a couple of meters from this particular building and not closing off the line, not closing off the connection between, or the road closure.
That was not closing it off? Just shifting it, so reducing this?
Option number 2.
Okay.
And I'm assuming there could be some parking on site as well. I'm not quite sure about that. But there could be some parking on site. But if there's not, then certainly along the road, similar to what the apartment block has. Yeah, it's interesting. You say you would have an exit on the north side of this building?
I believe it would be a fire exit only at the bottom of the stairwell. Let me just try
Okay,
to.
but the entrance right on High Tide, is it? Facing onto High Tide?
Yeah. So Peter, if Peter could, he's going to take this. The pointer
Yeah,
button
thanks,
there.
Peter.
So this is High Tide here.
Yeah.
And this is the undeveloped part
Right.
of the road.
Right,
So the main entrance to the building is right at the corner.
okay,
There is on-site parking here,
right,
and this is, at this point, all landscaping. So as Angela said, if there is a concern, you could certainly fit additional parking all
Yeah.
the way along there, although
Right.
they prefer landscaping.
yeah,
But perhaps there's a way to reserve future parking if it becomes a problem or something like that. But I think they'd prefer to see this remain as landscaping.
And there's an emergency exit at the bottom of that
There
stairwell.
is, so there's an
So that could
pedestrian
serve
exit
for.
out
oh, that's,
this
yeah,
way.
okay, yeah, no
So
problem.
there is room to park vehicles perpendicular, probably 10 cars along there.
I think
Yeah.
a bit of both, because right now, if we continue that parking that's here, it would
Yes.
come on the property line like this and run perpendicular,
Right,
because the sidewalk would be on the far side.
yeah, no problem, thank you. So I would go for option 2.
Councillor Lutz with another question.
Thank you. When you talk about 4 units being accessible, how was that number derived? Like, is that enough?
Well, that's what the proposal was for 4. We have asked and we're recommending that we do an additional 4 adaptable. As you can see on this level of the floor plan, there are only 8 units on the ground floor. There is no elevator proposed. 4 fully accessible units for wheelchair, I think, will go a long way. Currently, there is no elevator at the shelter. But there is a proposal to put an elevator at that location.
Yeah.
I think the numbers that of the clientele they're looking at, but of course they're going to age if they live there for a long time. So that's why having adaptable units will be helpful.
Just as a follow-up to that, has this application made it to Accessibility Advisory? I don't recall seeing it.
No, it has not.
It has
You
not.
could add them to the list if you would
Yeah, I
like
think they're
to.
here.
The list.
I think they're here.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. We did have them on. We missed it at the last meeting. We were going to bring it forward to the one coming up, and that would be before the public hearing. So we would have their input before that time.
Good, good.
Okay. And advisory planning as well, is that?
They have seen it. Their comments were, I believe, all in favor. They'll see that on. Where is that? On page 36. So they recommended the approval of the OCP amendment and the approval of the zoning amendment. They also recommended a partial road closure and that the applicant add exterior lighting and address safety concerns at the development permit stage.
Okay, yeah, I guess my question would be, do we not send these applications as a matter of course to the Accessibility Advisory? Or is it something that has to happen in addition?
It's usually, we don't have a council policy on which ones are brought forward. We've been looking for the consideration of the committee and council to look at that in terms of who they would wish to have look at. Do they want all development permits of multifamily buildings, or all development permits of all industrial and commercial buildings? So that's the consideration. We don't have a clear council policy on what, so we look to the committee to advise, or we recommend something.
Okay.
I just thought it was standard that they would get it.
Yeah, I thought so too. Well, we'll provide some direction on that at a later date. I was just curious at this point. Councillor Seegers with a further question on the report.
Actually, just a comment on page 33. It indicates that if we get the housing agreement in place for these units to be non-market rental housing, that this property would allow for relaxation of the DCCs, given that it's DCC exempt eligible. Would that be the term? I don't know what the terminology would be. Something like that. Okay, I just
Yes,
want to point that out to committee.
In the DCC bylaw, it allows the Director of Planning and Development Services to waive or relax development cost charges for non-market affordable housing developments.
Okay, seeing I can jump in here with a few of my questions. So with this facility, is there a 24-hour staff person there?
Yes, 24/7, 7 days a week.
Okay.
There'll be 2 people, I've been told, that will be there 24 hours a day.
And they'll be monitoring issues that may come up related to noise. And the only reason why I'm asking is we did receive the 2 letters from the neighbor raising the issues of lighting, parking, and noise and safety. So that may address some of those.
At the public information meeting that was well attended, about 75 people attended from the public, there was the Rain City operator said that that's clearly what they do address is behavior, that they will address behavior problems, and that's what they work towards. And they work to bring other programs in, such as counseling, cooking classes, that kind of thing, where people are getting more nutrition counseling, that kind of thing too.
Right, yeah, and I'm aware of that. The supportive housing standards in BC are quite good, and quite often there is no impact in the neighborhood level. My other question was about the road closure. So if we were to close, as is being proposed, that chunk of road, what size of road or type of road would then be allowable in that area?
So if we look at the tree, if I can get there. No, it was back. Megan, are you able to get back to the is it tree survey slide quicker? Do you see it? Further, yeah. That one, that's correct. So if we wanted to maintain the trees, this is the property line now. We don't have enough room if we want to maintain the trees anyway to put the road in that area. So if the trees are a concern, and it does seem to be a neighborhood concern, then we want to bring the road down into this location here along the fence line. Now that's a clear opening area there. So there is the ability to bring a 6 meter to 7 meter wide road in that location, as well as the sidewalk.
So that would be a laneway then, or something of that standard?
We're thinking that 6 meters allows 2 cars to pass in both directions easily. Lamprey Lane is currently only about 4.5 meters, to give you some idea of the width of that lane currently. So 6 meters allows 2 cars easily.
Right, and I guess in response to that, we're starting to see what looks like a bit of a community services compound here, which I actually like. We've got a number of different services in one area. I mean, this would be the envy of most small communities in BC. If we were talking about dealing with our issue of this road here, I mean, from a high level planning standpoint, it's quite easy to see that high tide is likely not going to be used as a major thoroughfare at any point in the future. And in theory, there might be some other options if we wanted to enhance this facility and others by turning that whole area into green space. Is that something that staff would recommend?
In speaking to the engineering department, they would like to ensure that there is a bit of a road network that happens there, and the fire department as well. One of their comments is definitely to have a road connection through to the 3 areas. The issue becomes if there is any problem around the corner of Ebb Tide and Wharf Avenue, there's no way for a fire truck to get through. It will just help with a lot of issues around snow removal. So currently, the garbage trucks and the snow removal guys are actually traveling on their property because the old location of that pavement, you can't tell that that's private property, that the circle around the end is there. So we do need some kind of connection through. It would have been an idea to possibly close it off, but then there needs to be a proper bulb at the end, and I believe it would take out more of the trees, actually, if you did it that way. I think there's a good possibility that we can come in through there and just take out a few trees.
Right. Okay, and then my other question was the entrances from the south, from this side, from the road dedication. I believe on the plans that were shown, both of the major entrances are from this location. So what type of infrastructure are we going to have to build on that roadway dedication to allow for that plan?
I think we can work with the architect on that to look at that and to see how that would work. Like pedestrian connection can certainly come through trees and be separated from the sidewalk area. So that's something we can look at. And if there needs to be some kind of traffic calming at the end of the road, that's a possibility as well. So we'll be sitting down to work at the next level with the applicant's engineer and themselves, and to look at the requirements and see how they can best be accommodated, and the wishes to protect the trees as well.
If we could just go to page 44 of the report, of our agenda, actually.
Is it the site plan?
It's the multiple reliefs.
Okay. That one?
That one, yeah. The top left-hand corner kind of shows what I'm getting at, is that the major entrances are heading into undeveloped road dedication. And I just want to make sure we have a good handle on that, what we're going to have to build in there, because that would be a developer contribution, would it not?
The road will be, even if it's offset, the BC Housing is willing to construct the road. And at this point, we'll just look at how we can best accommodate that. I mean, if there are cars parked in here, that also makes it kind of difficult to have a walkway coming out right into some vehicle parking. So it's potential that perhaps we need to look at bringing the entrance coming in this direction. And I think if we give this back to the architect, remember this is a conceptual design, if we give these, the framework to the architect, they'll be able to find a solution that works.
Okay, thank you. Further from committee, Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. With regards to the parking, I just wanted to comment. I would prefer to the landscaping as well, but the building be sited so that should more parking be required in the future, that it can be provided. But I mean, if other developments in other communities indicated it's not required, and you've reviewed that information, I'm happy with that, but I think we should make sure that if it's required, we can put it in later. Sorry? Yes, don't do anything that would preclude having additional parking. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions from committee on the report? Seeing none, we'll move to the recommendations. And I believe we'll move through these one at a time because could potentially be some significant discussion coming out of it. So we're on recommendation 2. The committee recommends to council an official community plan amendment bylaw be given first reading and schedule a public hearing, and as well first reading for zoning and a public hearing.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Lutz, seconded by Councillor Seegers. Any discussion? If I could just jump in here, I think this is a massive leap forward in terms of the general supportive network that we have in Seashelt. I'll be supporting this. I think what we've heard from the community in terms of negative response is it's in line with what one might expect, and I think this is going to be a fantastic facility for those in need, and we should support it. All those in favor? That's carried. Recommendation number 3, the committee recommends to council that staff and BCB Housing be directed to draft and begin a housing agreement process for 100% of the apartment units in the affordable supportive housing.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Great. About the road closure, recommendation number 4, that staff begin a road closure process, and this is one of the options, so perhaps there may be discussion on this. Do I have a mover for recommendation 4? Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Yeah, I'd rather see us go with option 2 down.
And that was, to be clear, just to move it without closing the road?
That's correct.
Okay. Any rationale given as to why?
Because I think we might need the road.
Okay.
Sometime in the future, I agree with those arguments.
Okay. Any further discussion on that one? I'm prepared to jump in with mine. To me, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I think we know that we want to give a little extra space to that building in behind. And I look at more at that road dedication, that it's going to be used in different ways than a road. I mean, it's there, but we're starting to see the way that whole area is going to develop. We understand that we need some emergency access, but further than that, I'd like to see it preserved as green space, as what the surrounding residents have asked for. So I think either of these options actually give us that, which is nice. We get two options that get to the same area. So I'll be supporting what's been recommended by staff. No furthers. All those in favor? And that's carried. Any opposed? Yeah. Okay. One opposed. Okay. Recommendation number 5, the committee recommends to council that an official community plan amendment be considered in conjunction with our various core planning documents. That's pretty standard. Moved and seconded. Any discussion of that? All those in favor? That's carried. Item 6, that committee recommends pursuant to Section 475 of the Local Government Act. In addition to a public hearing, the council considers and confirms that the referral will happen to the following neighboring associations. We're going to see some amendments on that. Can we get it on the floor? An amendment motion on the floor? Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. I'd like to add the Accessibility Advisory Committee to the list.
Second that.
Okay, any further amendments to include on that, or all those in favor? And that's carried. So we've amended to include the Accessibility Advisory. Okay. Do I have a mover for the amended motion? Moved, seconded. Any discussion of that? And seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, and item 7, that final adoption of the zoning amendment bylaw be conditional on the provision of the following provisions. An application for a development permit for multiple family housing be received and receive council's approval. And a few others I'm sure committee has read. Do I have a mover for that recommendation? Moved and seconded. Any discussion of that? For myself, looking at item C, I know what's going to come. I think I know what's going to come back from the Accessibility Advisory Committee, is that the bottom floor, in theory, could be fully accessible and adaptable. All 8 units. We can wait for that, but I think that's what we're going to see. So we would deal with that in a future location. Yeah. Councillor Seegers.
I'd like to commend staff for working with BC Housing on this proposal, and BC Housing for their listening to our community. They've come a long way in their public consultation and public engagement, and it shows in how the public reacted at the meeting, at the Legion that they had the last time, and the massive support that came out from that. So thank you to all the work you're doing, and thank you to what BC Housing is doing with our community.
Thanks. Any further comments at this time? I had one more about item 7E, which was securement of off-site walkway improvements. I think we need to spell that out in a little more detail when we move forward. We've had some discussions about the main entrances being on that side, so I think probably shouldn't leave that one to chance and define it a little better. But otherwise, I'm very happy with this application. As I said before, it deals with a lot of key things going on in Seashell all in one place. So, if there's nothing further, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 6.2, development action chart for receipt. Moved and seconded. Any discussion of this at this time? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. On the first page, rezoning and/or OCP amendments, that's on page 130. Prime signal. I just noticed the dates on there, that the last action was in September of last year, and I'm just wondering where this is moving, or if it is moving.
Director Corbett.
Through the chair, we haven't had a lot of formal discussion with them. They have communicated back. There were concerns around the financial viability of that, and part of that was being attributed to the amenity contribution requirement on that was considered onerous, so we are relooking at that for them.
Okay, so it's still potentially in the hopper.
Potentially, yes.
Perfect, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, page 133. There's two of them on here that I noted. One was High Point. Just wondering if there's been any movement on that one that we know of.
Director
This
Corbett.
time we're having, it's still under review. We think it will be near resolution, but we still have our lawyer looking at that.
Okay, and then I also noticed the Wobbly Canoe Cafe. We're still awaiting payment of the landscape bond. Are we following up on that one?
Director Corbett. Yeah.
That, actually, I can't publicly speak about that. I can assure you we are moving on it.
Perfect, thank you. All right, and then the last page. We have 4 plans on there: Integrated Community Sustainability Plan, Zoning Bylaw, Recreational Marijuana Production, and the Parks Master Plan. And all of those have indicated dates that are passed, so I'm just looking for an update. And I know it's a lot of work.
Director Corbett.
Through the chair, with Integrated Community Sustainability Plan, we have provided information to Dylan on potential for an action plan that was done through meeting with the manager group about what the various departments could do. That has been submitted. They are developing the draft. We expect to get it in the next week, and then it will go back into some process on that. What we haven't seen from them is what their actual recommendations are in terms of moving forward. So I would assume what we will probably do, or it certainly would be my recommendation on it, is that we would actually have an annual implementation strategy that goes with that and updating it just to keep it alive. So we anticipate seeing a draft very soon. With zoning bylaw, we've done a lot of work in-house. It's kind of gone back and forth a little bit on our definitions. The non-medical cannabis issue was in there. Some of the specific use regulations of relooking at them just based on some issues that have come up over the last year of needing to kind of calibrate some of that a little bit differently. Most of that is complete, and then we're looking at now of opening it up to stakeholder and public process. So I now have a staff person looking at what that stakeholder engagement will be. We'll probably do it in slightly different steps in that the business community and the development industry is affected very differently and weigh in very differently on it. So we'll have separate process on that versus public community associations. Usually the issues are a little different, and the amount of detail is sometimes different, or the focuses are. So we're putting that together and anticipate doing that very quickly. Recreational marijuana production and retail bylaw. We're looking at a couple of things with that. One is doing an interim solution, which Angela is working on right now. And thank you for the Vernon information, because that settles some of or at least provides another approach to dealing with that. And then in the new zoning bylaw of dealing with that, both through the definition section to make sure it's not included within general retail, and then in terms of the production facilities for non-medical, will probably mirror a lot of the work that was done, that Angela did on the medical marijuana, so probably won't differ too much on there. It's really the retail component that we need to be looking at. That's where we're silent in the plan right now. Development application policies and bylaw review. So I have redrafted or done a new draft for the planning procedures bylaw, which will come before you and council very soon. We're also working on some things that would be aligned with the bylaw, but separate from it, is changing the checklists required for new applicants and the applications themselves. We want to keep it separate from the bylaw. It allows us to update a little easier. So that work is being completed, and the bylaw will be in front of you fairly shortly.
Thank you.
Oh, Parks Master Plan, that was the other one. We do have, that is nearing completion. We do have a conference call scheduled with the with the consultants next week to look at their completed draft at this stage. And then once that has gone through, they'll do some finishing touches on it, and it'll be back to us and into council.
Thank you. Councillor Shanks, question.
Just a very quick question, because I brought up the prime signal situation last time and asked staff to look into it. Should you reach an impasse with regard to the amenities, would it ultimately come back to council, or could it?
One is the application itself of what made sense. So yes, it would probably come back to council of what seems reasonable right here. And the other is a larger discussion on our community amenity contribution approach. In some cases, it needs a little more rigor on it, and it needs caps on it so that it full disclosure, this is my issue, it might not be yours. My concern with it is that when we combine in our policies the density bonusing strategy along with community amenity contributions, you can see places where we've actually doubled or even more than that of the base density. And in my mind, that's not a density bonus, that's a rezone. So I think we need to have a little more rigor and some caps in there as to how high you can go before you're actually into something very different, and it's a very different expectation for the community. With the community amenity contributions, I think it needs to be clear what we're targeting, where they go, and how we combine that so that, I mean, the intent of it is to mitigate the impact of a rezoning, of a change to a use, change to an intensity of use. I'm not sure if, my concern is that I don't want to see it being used to justify what might not have been a very acceptable plan. The plans need to stand on their own. This is over and above that to mitigate, but it shouldn't be a planning justification for something we don't want to see. So it's getting a little more rigor, a little more discipline on it, and redoing that policy and bringing that forward.
Thank you. I had a question myself on the Vanta Pacific. As you can see, the last action date was on the rezoning was August of 2013, and then we one of the first things I recall doing here as a councillor was the development permit, which I'm assuming has now lapsed. It's been 4 years and no construction has begun on the hotel. Any comment from staff?
Yeah, the developer at that time changed direction. And while the development permit, yes, is no longer valid for the hotel, they are still planning on proceeding with that. But their focus has been on their subdivision development, and that has required servicing agreements. And you will be seeing a latecomers agreement coming in shortly on that proposal. They will have to come back for their development permit on the hotel. That's correct.
Thank you. Anything further from committee? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. Questions from committee or the community?